All right, guys, my hair looks like a mess. This is how we work. We got Tyler digging the holes because he's the muscle. We got Daniel being the engineer, making sure everything is perfect. And then we have Sergeant Andre drinking Capri Sun, just watching the process. Let's interview him. Let's interview him. Hello, sir. What are you doing?
Just watching these two gentlemen build this TV.
Yeah? Are they doing good? Are they doing good?
You know, I've been giving them little pointers.
Let's see what your point of view looks like. We
Little
like your point of
pointers
view.
here and
We like
there.
your point of view. That's very nice. And what are you drinking, Capri Sun?
Yeah, a little what's that? Wild cherry waterfall.
Well, shoot, man. Nothing like in the desert drinking a nice cool beverage while everybody else works.
Hey, I do what I do. Hey, I do what I do. Hey, I do what I do.
That's it. Hello guys, I'm Roberto Valenzuela, my Canon Explorer of Light, and we are on our second episode of Photo Cookies. Photo cookies are gonna be little bite-sized educational cookies for you to be inspired, have a little fun, entertain yourself a little bit, and it shouldn't take more than 10 to 12 minutes to do each on every one of these cookies, which is going to be talking about my favorite photos and the making of, behind the scenes, the planning, the equipment, and everything that we had to do to put together to create a really cool image that I personally love. So let's get to it, because my wife said to me, you can go to the studio and record one of your stupid cookies. However, you have to be back in 15 minutes because I need help changing the diapers and feeding the new baby who's only 2 weeks old. So there is, like I've always said, there's two kinds of weapons of mass destruction. There is the military kind and the brand new mother kind. You do not want to piss off the brand new moms, okay? They are a weapon of mass destruction. Boom, explosion, and you gotta live with them. So you blow up. Nobody, it's not good. Not good blowing up, okay? Let's take a look at what's happening with this particular photograph. This photo was the photo that I photographed for the Canon R6 campaign. It was also the final photograph we took for the entire campaign of the R5 and the R6. We did both campaigns on the same day. This photo required quite a bit of planning, okay? Let me show you, here's the final photo, but let me show you some of the planning we had to do in order to create that. So just look at the place, look at this. Look at the place we had to drive. We had to drive in the middle of nowhere in order to find this place. This is also at the Whisper Rock Ranch. But then you have these kinds of construction of these poles and stuff that we got at Home Depot and all this stuff. The whole point of this photograph was to create a campsite with friends, enjoying nature, enjoying the outdoors, hanging out, playing guitar, talking, and just enjoying life. That was the entire mentality and thought process of this picture, of this photograph. So if I would have brought in a regular tent, like one that you would buy at Costco or something, it would clash with the desert. So we couldn't do that. We couldn't bring like a Coleman tent or something you would buy commercially at Target or something, or Costco. You had to build something that kind of goes with the whole desert nature, simple. Okay, so that's what we had to do. So we ended up going to Home Depot and buying some wood poles. We bought some painter's tarp. We bought some rope, and we came back and we put it together. And we had to put it together at the same time that we were going to be photographing the last picture, because we wanted to make sure that we had our calculations correct. That's the difference between a campaign and just doing a photo shoot. That in a campaign, you really need to know your stuff, because you don't want to be guessing. You want to be acting on knowledge, not acting on luck or guessing. Okay, so, but here it is. Here's Daniel. Daniel's on the red shirt. He's dealing with the rope. You have Tyler. You can never miss him because he's got more muscle than Hercules. And then you have Andre on the right side wearing the white shirt, drinking a Capri Sun. No comment. Okay. So here we are putting the second little tent together. Okay, the first one looks pretty crappy, as you can see. We had some work to do there. But this is basically the planning that it took to get this going. This photograph that you're seeing here was actually for me to be able to see different angles and see what kind of angle was going to look the best with the background and the tents in the foreground. Okay, so anyway, here's Daniel and Tyler working, and Andre drinking Capri Sun, watching us. Okay, so it's all the important jobs. Okay, but let's take a look at the final, the way this came out. So you can see the way this was built, and then you can see. So here's that build right there. Boom, boom, and then you can see the final result. Now, how do we go from that to this? Well, couple of things we have to do, and this is where the tips come in. Tip number one: those rocks that you see here, these rocks right here, those rocks were not there. Those rocks were somewhere else. We had to bring the rocks over there. Okay. So tip number one: it's okay for you to change things around in the scene. If you have permission and everything's cool, then I suggest you move things around, and as long as you put it all back perfectly the way you found it, I think it's good. So we moved the rocks to make it look like a campfire. Okay. Then we brought that box where that model Rebecca in the middle is sitting. We brought that from one of our props. Okay, those things, that little wood tree trunk looking thing that you see here, I actually bought that at a yard sale. Okay, so like at a junkyard thing. And then my brother-in-law even brought this lamp from his house in Tucson in order to create more of a realistic campsite. So, you know, you might not even notice that little lamp, but that lamp took effort. Like, we actually had to call, hey, can you please bring that lamp? Do you have a lamp that looks like it would be like, you know, very basic campsite? Yeah, let me look. He had to go look for it. All these things, you're like, why would you do that? Nobody even sees that. It makes a difference in the final photograph. So tip number 2, put the effort, because it makes a difference. The more effort you put in your photos, the more benefits, the more it will pay. I'm telling you, it will pay back in dividends the more effort you put in. Don't be lazy in a photo shoot like this, okay? Next, tip number 2, let's talk about the settings of this photograph, because this was pretty tricky, okay? First, look at the scene. The scene is very much at sunset, okay? We have a very low angle of light, providing a very strong direct rays of light hitting the back of the model's hair, and the model's hair is blonde. That is right there your tip, your lighting tip number 1. If the light coming from the sun is hitting the person's hair directly in the back, and you do not use a flash or a strobe or some sort of light to illuminate the face, what's going to happen is you're going to try to slow down the shutter speed or increase the ISO or whatever in order to bring detail back in the face, okay? And as you basically bring that detail back in the face, you're overexposing the back because it's getting lit by the sun directly. And if they have blonde hair like he does, James has blonde hair, and Rebecca there has like a light brown hair, you're gonna blow it out, and then, my friends, you are in ghetto fabulous mode, okay? It looks ghetto. It doesn't look professional at all. So, and you say, well, that's the sun. Well, that's not the sun. You're the photographer. You're supposed to control all the light that shows up in your little frame when you look through your little camera. Everything that shows up in that little frame is on you, my friends. So I went and I grabbed a light meter, which is something that people have forgotten. And I'm not saying I'm not a big lover of light meters, but in these cases, light meters really help. So here's my decisions. My ISO had to be low enough to give me the best quality possible. If you have a shot that's relatively in dark environment like this, like very little light, okay, and you shoot this at a high ISO like 3200 or 6400, when you try to do any kind of editing on post-production, you're going to damage the file very quickly. The higher the ISO, the more easily damaged the file becomes when you try to do edits on it. The stronger, the more robust file that you can get comes from the lowest ISO possible. So because I wanted to make sure that this was gonna be probably a billboard somewhere, I had to stay under 200 ISO. That will give me the most robust file for editing, okay? It will be able to bring back the light detail from the sky, from the clouds, and all of this. Next, my ISO was set to 125, okay? My aperture is my next decision. What aperture would you choose for something like this? You have James in the foreground, you have Rebecca in the middle ground, And then you have Chanel, the girl on the left with a pic on the background. So you have 3 layers of people that are moving further and farther from your lens, which means that you have to choose who is going to be in focus. So I focused on the girl in the middle because that gives me the most flexibility in the front of the focal length and in the back of the focal length for keeping things in focus. So I focused on the girl in the middle. Then because James was a little bit closer to her, I knew that I was going to be able to get enough aperture. If I chose a proper aperture, I would be able to capture him in focus, okay, or very close to it. And then the girl in the back, it's going to, in cameras, the way cameras work, if you focus here, you have more in the background in focus than you do in front of the focusing point. But the guy is very close to the girl in the middle, so I captured that. So I was able to capture him. But then the girl was pretty much a lot further away from the second girl, so I had to make sure that there was enough aperture to get her in focus too. So I chose aperture f9. It could have been f11, but that was gonna make my darkness darker. So I just said f9 is about as far as I can go. From there, I had to choose my shutter speed. This is where your light meter comes in. You go quickly to where the male model is and get the back of the hair, okay? Have someone measure from your perspective, from where you're shooting, have someone measure, okay? Put the light meter right by his blonde hair where the sun would hit it from your camera angle and see what shutter speed you get. And in my case, I got 1/50th of a second. Let's check it out and make sure that's right. I was at 1/50th of a second, aperture f9, ISO 125, okay? So now that I had my aperture set to f9, my shutter speed at 1/50th, I had to ask myself, at 1/50th, is that going to be fast enough to freeze motion? Let's take a look. You have 2 types of motion to deal with. Camera shake from the photographer and the motion from your subjects moving around to try to be realistic and pose properly by moving and being caught in action. I know that my personal movement could be controlled by the Canon R5 and the Canon R6 in body image stabilization that these cameras come with. So I also was shooting this with a Canon RF 28-70 2.0, which has an outstanding combination with that camera and that lens, gives you an incredible amount of image stabilization, okay? More than 8 stops or something like crazy like that. I don't know exactly what it is anymore, but it was enough for me to be cool about my own movement. But what about the movement of James? Because I wanted James and them to be moving. Why? Because I wanted them to look realistic, like they're in the moment. That's called finishing the picture, okay? How do you stop? How do you freeze movement? Well, 2 things. When I first started taking this photograph, let me put it back. When I first started taking this photograph, I actually had my lens at 70 millimeters. But because I needed to make sure that they were frozen while they were moving, I know that if you zoom out, the wider you are, the more flexibility you have with movement. You have more forgiveness in the ability of your shutter speed to freeze the movement happening in your subjects, okay? So I went from 70 millimeters and I zoomed out to 50 something. Let me see here. I zoomed out to 57 millimeters. At 57 millimeters, I was more open, more wide, which gave me a little bit more forgiveness in case they were moving. I would still be able to freeze them. That's the first little tip, right? If you're zoomed out, you can freeze more. If you're zoomed in, if you're shooting with like a 200 millimeter lens, it's gonna blur. Okay, anybody moving at those shutter speeds is gonna blur. But if you go wider angle, you have more opportunity to get it sharp. So there's that. Second, I used I was shooting at 1/50th of a second on the shutter speed, and that gave me a very dark face on them. Each of their faces looked very dark, so I had to illuminate the scene, but I had to do it at those settings. ISO 125, aperture f9, shutter speed 125. I had to keep to those settings because those settings were set for the back of their blonde hair not blowing out with the sun hitting them directly, as you can see. So I brought in a Pro Photo and I put the biggest octobox modifier that I had, and then because that modifier is so big, it spreads. I put a double diffusion on it, one diffusion in the middle, one diffusion in the end. That double diffusion creates a very nice environmental light. It doesn't look like a strobe at all. It looks like it just blends, which is perfect. So that was solved with a big modifier. Next, the next problem you got to deal with is the sunset is a very warm, very tan, very beautiful, toasty, warm light. And the strobe is a very cold 5,000 Kelvin, and it will not look good. It will contrast. It will clash. So in order to keep the lighting invisible, which is the key, is invisible lighting. You should not be able to tell that you used a strobe if you want to do a great job, okay, in these kinds of photographs. So, solution, I put a CTO gel and I make sure it covered the entire light really well. With that CTO, I lost some power from the Pro Photo light, so you probably lose like a stop of light. So I cranked it up another light, another stop to compensate for the CTO that was in between, that was attached to the Pro Photo B1. Then next step is to crank up the light and crank it up and up until you get the right balance between the natural light around the area and the light hitting your subjects from the strobe. Then step number 3, once you get the light to look like it's all blending, then you start moving the strobe left and right. Just start, it's called feathering the light. Feather the light in order to create a softer look. Otherwise, you may run the risk that the light hits them directly and then it creates specular highlights, which will be a telltale sign that you used a strobe to illuminate the front of their faces. Solution, feather the light, move the light. Obviously, this is not the modifier that I used. I used a big octagon, like probably 6-foot octa, okay? But this is what I mean. Grab the light, point it directly at the person you focused on, then feather it left, feather it right, feather it left, feather it right. And when you photograph with feathered lights, a feather quality of light, you get no specular highlights whatsoever, and you should be in business, okay? Guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of Photo Cookies. I hope you subscribe to the channel because we're gonna be bringing more of this where it came from. More action, more cookies, more photo cookies. Let's do it. Photo cookies are going to be little 10-minute videos or 12 or whatever that are gonna be inspirational, little fun videos of the making of some of my favorite photographs, the ins and outs, the planning, the equipment, what it took, the building of the sets, the whole 9 yards, in a very quick, short, entertaining form. We'll see you guys later. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. We'll see you later. Take care. Bye.